What is up, guys? Even though our producer Tyler doesn't know it, it is in fact time for an MLB strategy show where we will take you through game by game here today's main slate and discuss all the top pitching, all the top stacks, everything you need to know. But I am Chris Spags, joined by my co-host on this one, a man you see all the time on the channel. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How are you doing, Greg?
Yeah, a little bit of confusion before the show because, we just have the timer counting down and you noticed that it didn't match up with when we were supposed to start the show. And yeah, it turns out Tyler's computer just tells him the wrong time, which, that's no good.
No, it's not helpful. We were just discussing some DFS things, having a nice time talking. And Greg and I, normally I would say, I don't speak for Greg here, not rushing to do a show necessarily, but, at a certain point, it's like, we got to get on the air and do it. And our boy Tyler, I don't know if he got pranked or what, but clock set behind. We are here though, and here for you guys as always. So first of all, make sure to hit that like button because maybe that'll fix Tyler's computer and get it on track. But also make sure to subscribe to the channel, check out the content we have going on all day long. Starts bright and early with the NBA strategy show. It continues on through the NBA deeper dives or MLB deeper dives, MLB live before locks, NBA live before locks. It's all still here on the channel. So make sure to check it all out as we go. And also make sure you're playing over at PrizePicks where they're doing the simplest fantasy game on the market, where if you're tired of the sharks, the lineup optimizers, and the mass multi-entry, or you're tired of dealing with the ownership projections and things like that, that can be hard for a newer player to unpack, just go over to PrizePicks. All you have to do is pick 2, 3, 4, 5 players available on the board. Let's go over under their projected score. If you correctly select the 5-player lineup, you get 10x your entry fee as well. They have the NFL, they have the NBA, they have esports, they have MLB, they have honestly more sports on there than they're even listing in this ad read, but you basically play whatever you want, do cross-sport bets, do whatever you want over on PrizePicks. There's a lot of ways to make this app and this platform all what you want out of your betting and DFS experience. So go check them out on the App Store or Google Play and use that promo code Awesemo when you sign up because you'll get a $100 deposit match on there. That is the best one you will find in the industry. So go play on PrizePicks today. Check them out. Also, make sure to check out the Top Pitchers tool, which is the free premium tool today. We will talk about those numbers as we go throughout, but you can update it for yourself and take a look and get a read on how we approach the pitching slates here at Awesemo. So go check that out on the site as well. Free premium tool of the day. If you want that in your life every single day, use the promo code MLB Strategy Show to get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Platinum. Go check it out at awesemo.com/join. Promo codes MLB Strategy Show for 25% off your first week. Greg, overall thoughts on the slate for you? It feels like kind of a crummy pitching slate and also one where I'm surprised that Toronto isn't grossly overowned. So those are the two observations I had early on, but anything you're seeing before we get into the game by game?
I'm surprised that the Houston Astros aren't grossly overowned because that's what's been the last 3 slates. And, it's funny. Generally, if there's a team that's massive chalk in baseball or a massive chalk pitcher that goes off, it's just not going to be a good day for me. So last night with the Astros scoring a gazillion runs, that was no good for me. But it's kind of been funny because the last 3 days, I kind of consider them all together because the Houston Astros all 3 days rated out as extremely negatively leveraged in our top stacks tool. And my results from those slates, the first day where the Astros were way overowned, got my ass kicked, lost about 50% of my entry fees. And then the second day, the Astros were not nearly as good, and they were also overowned. And I ended up having a 10x night. And then yesterday, the Astros also ended up being good, no good for me, lost about half my entry fees. So it's kind of funny. Like, I think a lot of people look at those slates individually and say, like, hey, I should have run the Astros in all 3 of those spots because they were good 2 of the 3 days. But I still look at it in hindsight and be like, hey, I'm happy I wasn't on the massively overowned chalk team in those spots, because even though it only worked 1 out of 3 times, just with the variance of MLB DFS, that kind of makes it worthwhile over the course of time. But anyway, long story short, I'm surprised that the Astros aren't grossly overowned against Jose Urania again today.
Yeah, they're getting a little bit of a park downgrade moving away from Baltimore, but they definitely paid it off yesterday. Even guys like Abraham Toro, who we've maligned, and I personally maligned on the show this week after almost playing 100% of them the other night. That would have been very poorly. You would have been happy if you did that last night, but that's not the approach you're normally trying to take with MLB. And the Abraham Toros of the world normally not going to give you a ton in the way of home runs. One thing we did talk about yesterday, Greg, which I think just to give us a pat on the back after you are pointing out, the actual reality of the situation, but that Rays stack wasn't bad without Wander Franco. And that was one tournament approach that I think just shows sort of thinking about things outside the box. I don't know that would have been a tournament winner, but I was intrigued to see like, oh, this actually was a viable approach. And Franco was perfectly fine. Like, he's not going to have massive days every day, but just going to a team that, had a high run total and counting the other guys to do it was something that I think should probably be a lesson for some people out there.
Yeah, I mean, 6 fantasy points at min price, that was, a fine result, but ultimately the best possible race stack did not include Wander Franco. The thing is that nothing mattered other than Astro stacks. There were like all the players were 25 to 35% owned. And then on FanDuel, some of them even above that. and they ended up scoring 13 runs. So at that point, you needed to have Astro stacks. And by the way, even if you had an Astro stack, they were so highly owned that about half the field that stacked the Astros still didn't end up cashing just because they were that popular. So for me personally, it's a route that I'm rarely going to go down when I'm building my lineups. But certainly yesterday, it was something you needed after the fact.
And Dennis Kardakaris, who was our Australian friend, saying, slow down, Spags. I can't keep up. I am like a dad driving the family across the country right now. I'm trying to make the best time possible for every point I have to make. But we do appreciate everybody in the chat who's here today, including Dennis, and always appreciate the international presence as well. So thanks for being here, guys. And let's get into the game by game where we've got Baltimore getting 4.7 implied runs, going into Toronto's home in Buffalo and the smaller park there that's also going to be playing a little bit hotter than it's played some of the weeks recently, 75 degrees, 50% humidity, but the small park's going to be the main thing here. And the Orioles getting 4.7 implied runs gets Anthony Kay, a guy who has historically been, I guess, a little bit more of a long reliever than an opener, but still a guy throwing about 68 pitches per appearance so far this year. 272 batting average allowed this year, 266 since 2019. And the main thing is to jump out for me, not a high barrel ball rate, not a high launch angle guy, but the park is small enough here that I certainly don't mind taking some shots at the Orioles with them looking under-owned the corner of the top stacks tool, Greg. And also a lot of ownership going to Anthony Kay himself, and that is one that I'm not seeing at all. 28% expected to go there. He does have a 4K price tag and a decent pitch count, but this seems like a spot right away that I wouldn't mind knocking down a lot of that ownership if you feel similarly.
Yeah, I'm just looking at his pitch counts really quick and trying to figure out, are we expecting to work all that deep into the game? Because there's some really odd things from his pitch counts last couple of games. So last time out, 43 pitches, but the outing before 91 pitches. So if we are actually going to get 90 plus pitches potentially from Anthony Kay, that's hard to totally ignore from a pitcher who's the flat min on DraftKings. Obviously, FanDuel, there'd be no reason to consider him. But on DraftKings, I'm going to definitely be paying attention to if there's any kind of stories on him, how long he's going to be allowed to work into the game, because, this is such a cheap salary for a pitcher who might not actually really have any restrictions. But on the flip side, if he's actually only going to play 40 pitches again, then there's no reason to consider him. So I feel like we need a little bit more information here. As of right now, though, I'm going to say that he's worth being in the player pool, just not quite as much ownership as the field has. We have him with a 10% chance to be a top 2 pitcher on the slate compared to 28% ownership. Although it is interesting that right now, in terms of a value play, we have him with a nearly 50% chance to be one of the top 2 value pitchers on the slate, which, that happens when a pitcher is min price. So that's really what I'm looking for, is how long is he going to be allowed to work into the game? Because, it's generally there's some kind of trends with pitchers' pitch counts, but not when somebody went 90 pitches 2 starts ago and then 40 the one after that.
Yeah, it definitely seems like an odd one to unpack here. And it does seem like Anthony Kay is, to his credit, strike rate's been up to 24.5% this year. Does have a 10% swinging strike rate, a 30% chase rate. So these are not bad numbers normally, compared to some of the other pitchers we're going to talk about, including the one in the same game. So I get it for Anthony Kay being at the minimum salary, and I certainly get taking some exposure there. And the fact that he does, as Greg mentioned, have a 47% chance to be one of the top 2 value pitchers on the slate definitely seems interesting. But I just see Baltimore too, like they've hit lefties really well in the year, a 330 on base percentage, 178 ISO, a 21.5% K rate, and a 114 WRC plus. These are all really good marks. So I don't think Baltimore is the team that you're necessarily trying to target with a lefty pitcher. So that to me just gives me interest, in addition to the ownership going to K, in that Baltimore stack, Greg. And as I mentioned a lot in these shows, you are a known Orioles lover. You're always willing to go to them because nobody ever really plays them as bats. So you're willing to go to them today with Anthony Kay looking like a pitcher that the field is going to be on.
It's funny because we have Anthony Kay as the most likely top value pitcher on DraftKings, and we have the Orioles as the most likely top value offense on DraftKings. So it is a spot that it looks like there's sensible reasons to play both sides of it. Although I do think that the Orioles stack is more viable on DraftKings than FanDuel, because one of the main appeals that I have to an Orioles stack on DraftKings is that Anthony Kay is projected to be 30% owned. That's not going to be the case on FanDuel. There's none of that kind of leverage to be gained. So that's where I think the Orioles more appealing on DraftKings, just for those kind of leverage purposes. As individual hitters, the guy who almost always stands out to me against a left-handed pitcher is going to be Pedro Severino, one of the best lefty hitting catchers in the entire league. So he's fairly cheap. Also, another guy, no reason to consider on FanDuel. We don't have to roster a catcher, but on DraftKings at 2,800, I do think that Severino is one of the better value catching options.
Yeah, I think there's enough value in here to go around. Like, I don't even mind taking Pat Valleca in the 9 hole, who's had a 211 ISO, though some of that was in cores, but has had that since going against lefty since 2019. And then, yeah, Anthony Santander, reasonable price tag, hitting cleanup for this team. There are definitely some ways to get there if you want to try to get leverage against Anthony K, or if you're playing Anthony K with the field, just try to hedge a little bit of that exposure, just in case he does have a bad day. Though worth pointing out again, he's keeping that ball down pretty well. 5-degree launch angle, 7% barrel ball rate, 24% fly ball rate. All those would be pretty much the highest marks on the slate, or right there with it. Dean Kramer, though, going on the other side, a guy that I would not want any exposure to. He's not really getting strikeouts, 20.7% K rate, though he has been 22.3% since 2019. But the barrel ball rate, 12%, launch angle of 21 degrees, going against Toronto in a park that's going to be smaller. No, certainly not as bad as their Florida park in terms of the park benefits that happen there. But Toronto has so many dangerous hitters that the 1% Dean Kramer, even that feels like a lot. But the Toronto stacks, Greg, like not overowned right now, and despite a 6.4 implied run total, I think that's to me the thing that really stands out. That I love Toronto stacks right now. If the ownership does stay flat, I don't know how you don't get there a lot.
Yeah, so this is another team where massively different FanDuel versus DraftKings, because on FanDuel they're picking up nearly 20% ownership as a team, and they're fairly negatively leveraged. Not the case on DraftKings. We're actually going under owned. So then we have to look at the individual hitters and try to figure out, like, okay, why is there not that much ownership going to the Toronto Blue Jays on DraftKings? The reason is because Marcus Semion's 5,400, Bo Bichette is 6,000, Vlad Jr. is 6,100. I mean, I think this is a team where I do want to be a little bit overweight to the field, but I find it really hard to include all of the top players in that stack just because of pricing concerns. So the guys that make the most sense to me in the stack, first up, George Springer, who is only 3,800 on DraftKings. Also, he has to end up being higher on this. The fact that he's 19% owned, I get, that's fairly significant for a hitter, but George Springer at 3,800 in this particular matchup, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that he wouldn't end up being massively popular. This actually ends up being the case that he's only 3,800, and not that, I mean, obviously the price tag isn't going to change, but the ownership could change. As of now, George Springer is my most rostered hitter.
And I think, too, going down the order a little bit more, I agree the price tag on Springer on DK definitely very low for a guy with a 312 ISO against right-hand pitching since 2019. And that's obviously a pretty good sample size for him as well. And that includes a lot of time hitting in Houston in that time frame as well. So that's definitely going to be a park upgrade for him overall. But going to Grichuk and Biggio, I think also solid plays here. Both guys over 200 ISOs. Lourdes Gurriel, also a 190 ISO guy. Like, you could stack this one up too, and I think take the bottom of the order, and I wouldn't hate that. Obviously, going to Bo Bichette, going to Vlad Guerrero in particular, those guys. 6K price tags are going to be ugly, but there are a lot of ways to stack them up here. And I think because of the prices being so high for the stars and then the bottom of the order being maybe not totally priced down, it's overall a team that just looks underrepresented and definitely one to watch the ownership on throughout the course of the day. Also, we had this question in the chat from Rishan Patel asking about the early slate. And just real fast, if we don't have time to talk about it today because it's only a 2-gamer and people don't really care that much about those short slates, but the data is still out there for you guys at awesemo.com. So make sure to go to awesemo.com/join. We have the top pitchers tool now updating for the early slates as well as the top stacks tool. And of course, projections are there. So just get the data for yourself. But sometimes it's not the best content to talk about a 2-game slate, Greg, because I feel like we would just literally be like, play every guy in some number that's relevant to the whatever the ownership is going to be.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add too is that, and it's something I actually have a meeting about after this, but I think what we're going to start doing going forward is for most of the slates where it's like, hey, we have a 3-game early slate, and then there's, an 8-game night slate, which we see all the time on not today's Thursday slate because there's only 2 games. We see a lot for Wednesdays and sometimes other Thursdays, occasionally Tuesdays, is we're going to start doing the early shows as a live before lock for half of it and then a strategy show for the other half. Because, sometimes it is a little hard to do a full hour show for a 3 or 4 game slate. So then it'll be a thing also, because we always have in the chat too, where people will say like, hey, I'd prefer you guys do live before lock. I prefer you do a strategy show. So we're going to start doing it half and half. And then people could, if they just want the strategy show portion, they could go back and rewind it after the fact.
And again, either way, the data's are there for you too. So that's really going to be the main part of your process. So even though we're glad to talk about it here, but yeah, check out the data for on the site itself. And again, the top pitcher tool, if you missed it, does have the early slate updates as well. So you can now get that because that wasn't part of the mix earlier in the year. Next game up, we got Atlanta getting 5.1 implied runs, Cincinnati getting 5.2 implied runs. Though Greg, the pitcher I don't think has been confirmed in this one. I'm seeing Sean Newcomb in some spots, but in others, it feels like there isn't a pitcher listed and also might not be odds listed. So is that what you're seeing here? Santillan versus Newcomb?
I think so. Let me just double check. Unless something's changed, but that is what I had written Actually, I don't see anybody yet for the Braves,
Okay.
but yeah, definitely Santillan for the Reds.
Yeah, Newcomb, I think, is on Schmancy Schmab, so that's what I'm going with for now. And they do have a line on there, though. Fantasy Cruncher didn't have. That's normally where I'm pulling my pitchers from, and they didn't have anybody available yet. So we're going to talk about this one as though that's the matchup, though it could change here. So make sure to tune into the deeper dive and live before lock starting today, 5 p.m. Eastern time for that 2-hour block, and it'll be Greg and I live before lock again, so you can enjoy this pairing one more time later today with our nuanced takes to develop throughout the day. But let's talk about the Atlanta side getting 5.1 implied runs against Tony Santillan on the year, giving up a 281 batting average, a 6.1 xFIP. It's only faced 39 batters, though, so the sample size could be one of those that levels out in a way that could be helpful for him, but he's not missing bats very well. An 8% swing strike rate, 24% chase rate. These are some of the worst marks on the slate. Also giving up an average exit velocity of 93 miles per hour. So there is some danger to go around here in a park that's going to be a warm day, 80-degree weather, 67% humidity, and Cincinnati already plays for power pretty well. To me, Atlanta, Greg, going to get Santillan seems like a pretty nice spot. Santillan also going deeper into games than you'd expect a guy who's got these numbers, 75 pitches so far per appearance. And I just don't see anything encouraging at all looking at his numbers. And certainly just a positive regression like we talked about with Mike Fultonevich yesterday. Sometimes it's so bad that it's got to get better. But Santillan, 12.5% barrel ball rate, 18-degree launch angle. Atlanta in this condition could really obliterate him, whether they have Acuna or not.
Yeah, so the one thing I'll say about him is about the Braves' stack is it does look like they're a little bit over-owned right now. And if I am going to pay up for a stack, I prefer to go to the Blue Jays as a team that's really expensive than the Braves because these teams are, fairly similar in terms of pricing and ownership. And the core bats for the Braves, Ronald Acuna, 6,200, Freddie Freeman, 6,000, Ozzie Albies, 4,900. And then these guys are 14% owned, 14% owned, 18% owned. So this is, a fairly similar situation to the Toronto Blue Jays. The difference, though, is that we do have the Blue Jays with a 14% chance to be a top stack today compared to 9% chance for the Braves. So I don't really think it's a bad spot for Atlanta, except right now, the way that I'm building out my lineups on DraftKings, I would tend to be overweight on Toronto in this kind of price range and then underweight on the Braves.
Kind of surprised that Abraham Almonte, who's been random chalk some days because of the low price tag, is all of a sudden the one that nobody's going to own amidst this group. And he's been completely fine to me, like a 405 on base percentage against righty pitching, enough at bats too, where that might actually be just who he is as a player. 133 WRC plus 198 ISO. I don't think he grades out the best for power, only a 2% barrel ball rate overall, but I feel like he's a perfectly viable play to get to if he's going to be in the cleanup spot and have 1% ownership. So that's just one thing to me that jumps out to decrease that ownership product if you don't want to play Guillermo Heredia down at the bottom of the order.
Yeah, so the reason that Abraham Almonte is going lower, I mean, he has one hit in the last week. So that's probably the main thing that drives down that ownership. He has walked a handful of times, but yeah, he only is his last handful of games 0 for 4, 0 for 2, 1 for 2. Also, it looks like he's gotten pinch hit in a lot of games, which is a little bit problematic. But yeah, I mean, if you're making Brave stacks, certainly I'd say 1% owned. That's a reasonable number to be overweight to, but it's not like I'm dying to roster Abraham Almonte either.
Yeah, I think overall, just an interesting team to watch here. Certainly, the confirmed lineup going to be a little more interesting to look at here. And Acuna, as I mentioned, was out yesterday, so keep an eye on that one too, because if he's out again, you could see Dansby Swanson hitting leadoff and at 3,600 in this particular matchup against Santillan. That certainly could be something that has a little more value, a little more utility to go to than it currently does. If it is Sean Newcomb going against the Cincinnati Reds today, they have 5.2 implied runs going against them. Newcomb so far has not pitched a lot per appearance, only 20 pitches per appearance. 1.8 whip on the year, 5 xFIP. Does have a 30% K rate, but that's probably an aberration here. Going back to 2019, he does have a 22.5% K rate. And the Reds, not great against lefty pitching in a way that surprises me, given the hitters they do have here with Castellanos, Suarez, Aquino, some of these guys who it feels like should hit lefties a little better. But I feel like the Reds in this spot, Greg, going against Newcomb, and just a guy that I'm never crazy impressed by. And I think I'm okay targeting him if he is the pitcher. But again, we're assuming here he is the pitcher. We don't know for sure. But I think the Reds, regardless of who's out there, I'm willing to take stabs just given the park factors and the fact that this game overall, highest combined total on the slate. And it does seem like on the spot that, I don't know, the Reds just should be scoring something here, even if it's not a full stack getting there.
Yeah, so if it is Newcomb starting, here's his pitch counts in his most recent outings. Newcomb, by the way, who was once a talented young pitcher and now is just basically been delegated to bullpen work. But his last handful of outings, 11 pitches, 25, 27, 23, 20, 23, and then just a bunch of bunch of outings where he was like 10 to 15 pitches. So with that in mind, Newcomb isn't a viable option, not somebody who's going to work all that deep into games, and it would be the Reds seeing a lot of the bullpen behind him. Here's a concern I have with the Reds being in a potential bullpen game. They pinch hit a lot. So guys like, well, Jesse Winker, they used to pinch hit for, but now he's just kind of part of the regular lineup because he's been so good this year. But, guys like Aristides Aquino, Kyle Farmer, even Tyler Naquin, if he ends up in the starting lineup, they constantly rotate these guys in or out. It is possible that Newcomb could end up starting, face a righty one time through, then the Braves bring a right-handed reliever, and some of these Red starters might only see one at bat. So that's something that definitely gives me a little bit of pause in terms of stacking Cincinnati.
Yeah, so definitely keep an eye on this one here, and we'll see. Starting pitcher will certainly be confirmed by the time we get to the deeper dive and live before a lock later today. But obviously, that's an important part of the equation here, and there certainly can be some different pitching options that would make Cincinnati look even better. But we'll talk about that later in the day. Next game up, we got Boston getting 4.2 implied runs going against Michael Wacha. Wacha in the year giving up a 284 batting average, which is basically in line with where he's been historically, a 289 batting average allowed since 2019. Also, K rate down to 18% from 19.2%. Wacha generally just not a guy who's going to offer a ton of upside, though he does randomly spike some upside days. Not something I think you're trying to target a bunch here. And going against Boston, a team with a lot of qualified hitters against right-hand pitching, I feel like in this spot, Greg, to me, Wacha, I guess maybe you can get some more than the 1% of the field, though I don't see the reason to do it. But it seems like the Boston bats could be the much more appealing side of the equation.
Yeah, for sure. We do have the Boston Red Sox going slightly under owned tonight, about 5.5% chance of being a top stack with only 4% ownership share. As for Michael Wacha, he's been a really weird pitcher because he used to be really good. And he's had times where it's looked like he's reinvented himself and be like, oh, Michael Wacha is good again. And then, he went to a team like the Tampa Bay Rays and you figure this is a team that is able to rejuvenate a lot of pitchers. Maybe that would work out for him. He's still not that old, still only in his 20s, but the results just haven't been there for him this year. 5.19 ERA, 6.7 expected ERA. So Michael Wacha hasn't pitched well this year. Also, his strikeouts are crazy down. He only has a 17.6% strikeout rate. Last year, he did see an uptick with the Mets. It went up to 23.7. So, that gave me a little bit of encouragement for him in terms of a potential fantasy asset this year, but it just hasn't been the case. So, I definitely side much stronger with the Boston side of this game and no reason to get to Wacha. And given the low ownership everywhere for Boston, it's a pretty reasonable team to get a contrarian stack to. The most rostered player on the team right now is Xander Bogaerts at 9%. So everybody in single-digit ownership.
Wacha giving up a 194 ISO to lefty bats in 2019, a 232 ISO to righty bats in 2019. So really both sides should benefit here. And they're a team to me as well that I think the price tag's a little bit less onerous than some of the Braves, some of the Blue Jays prices, and getting to Boston being under owned as a stack and really not that highly owned at all, where every single player here is going to be projected under 10% on DraftKings. I really have no issue stacking them up a lot and getting to them today. Even though, park factor is going to be, it is a downgrade for them playing in Tampa Bay. And we have seen, some tough days for them, but we've also seen them have success in this particular series just a couple days ago as well. So to me, any bats that jump out for you, because I think for me, Devers is going to be the one that jumps out the most. Lefty splits for him going to be strong with a 300 ISO against right-hand pitching, but JD, Verdugo, or Christian Arroyo up top, Bogaerts, I feel like that's a pretty obvious grouping there. And Hunter Renfroe too, better against left-hand pitching, but still got the 211 ISO against righties, and I have no issue going to him either.
Just because of the price and where they are in the batting order, Verdugo, cheap, also only project for 4% ownership. Kike Hernandez, cheap, actually really cheap, only project for 2% ownership. Those are the guys that I'm actually getting the most exposure to right now.
All right, and on the other side, we're going to have Nick Pivetta going against Tampa Bay. Pivetta on the year has been improved in terms of strikeouts, though one of those guys that we've talked about here, maybe one to watch as some of the weather heats up, a guy who could take a downturn, but again, playing at the roof closed in Tampa Bay should give him a little more of an upside here. The 27% K rate for him, 4.4 xFIP. Launch angle, a little bit problematic, 16 degrees. Barrel ball rate, a little problematic at 9.3% barrel ball rate, but going against Tampa Bay, they're striking out at a 26% clip on the year against right-hand pitching, and Pivetta, I think 23% ownership at that price tag, it feels a little bit like a sticker shock, but he does have higher odds of being a top pitcher today, according to Top Pitchers Tool. So you really wouldn't find an issue for me if you're going to get 25% Nick Pivetta on the slate, where there really are no stud pitchers out there.
So just talking about Red Sox pitchers in general, did you see what happened with Garrett Richards yesterday?
I saw he got bombed. I didn't see anything besides that.
So he got bombed, and he basically said after the game, he said, I've been a certain pitcher my entire career for 9.5 years. And he said that he basically has to throw out his entire repertoire of pitches and change everything because of the new rules. He said none of the pitches he's ever thrown his entire career work anymore. And so he basically got relegated yesterday to his breaking ball. I could be a little off on this, but I think he threw 11 breaking balls. Half of them went for strikes. The other half were balls. And then of the ones that were in the strike zone, 2 of them were hit for home runs and 1 of them was hit for a double. And he just came out of the game and was totally dejected looking. He might just be totally finished as a pitcher. Unless, like he said, that he has to change all the pitches he throws. He said every grip on every single one of his pitches has to change. He said he has to figure out new pitches. So, just kind of an idea of how some of these pitchers are going to be looking, totally different going forward. Not that I think that's going to necessarily apply to Pivetta, although, he has had results this year that are out of line with the rest of his career. So wouldn't be shocking if he saw any kind of downtick or anything like that. But just given the pitching options on this slate, yeah, I think he is somebody that we're going to want to get to. Also, the Rays are picking up, it looks like, a little bit more ownership than they should. The Pivetta price tag, certainly not appealing at first glance on 9,500. So there are other guys that I'd prefer to get to. But Pivetta is going to be in the player pool. Although I don't think I'm going to get to the 23% the field's at, just because some of these other pitchers who are priced around him, I'd still rather get to Luis Garcia, Jose Barrios, and Walker Buehler before I get to Pivetta.
Yeah, so something interesting here with Pivetta, that he is priced like a star, and then maybe, honestly, I'm surprised that the ownership didn't come down a little bit because of the price tag being that high, and maybe that is something that happens closer to lock, but right now it does seem under-owned according to the top pitchers tool, and I think, as Greg's pointed out here, that your mileage may vary with how you want to approach that. Maybe it's worth splitting that ownership up, but to me, I feel like he's worth being around the field, I would think. The Rays, though, going against Pivetta, certainly if you're going to think that Pivetta's due for some regression, that could come against a Rays team that does, despite their strikeout issues, have a 177 ISO on the year, 324 on base percentage against right-hand pitching. And you do have Wander Franco in the mix, and certainly that's going to be something that his price tag is now almost doubled overnight. So I guess he won't be the chalk play, especially after being something of a disappointment yesterday. But this team overall, Greg, like I have no issue going to them too. Not a great park, but going against Pivetta, I think seems like a reasonable move given the ownership going for him.
Yeah, I mean, but this is another one where the ownership's kind of already there. I'm trying to remember who is somebody who was in a similar situation. Oh, it was so Robbie Ray yesterday, where he said like, hey, look, all this ownership going to Robbie Ray. Would it make sense to stack the Marlins against him? And at first I said it would be in most cases, but not if the ownership is already there. And that's kind of what we have here, where Tampa Bay, they already are picking up 6% ownership as a team. And, that's more than I'd want to rush them in this spot. So if that was to come down, then yeah, I think that would make sense, but not considering the fact that we already have the Rays with this much ownership. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense as a leverage or contrarian stack when, number one, they aren't actually contrarian. Then number two, the leverage is kind of irrelevant when the field's already there.
Yeah, I could see it. I think to me, the thing with that jumps out is that Pivetta does have an 11% walk rate. If Tampa Bay can get on base, there's some room for these guys to sort of start to, get results against them in a way that is going to have a trickle down effect. So I don't mind getting there a little bit. It looks like the ownership's really only going to Franco and Brandon Lowe. So to me, there's a little bit less ownership, but I get the point. There is ownership here, especially for Franco and Brandon Lowe. So if you are going to stack them up, I try to get a little more of these guys in your lineup, or just go to different directions with different guys for the mini stack. Next game up, we got Houston getting 5.6 implied runs going against Jose Urena. As Greg talked about earlier in the show, Houston's been hitting pretty well this week, other than, I guess, the one night that didn't work out quite as well. But besides that, did take advantage of the matchup in Baltimore. They're going to Detroit, though, which is going to be a park downgrade generally. A park downgrade for Baltimore, probably a lateral move from their normal Houston home park. But 84-degree weather, not the most humid day, so a little bit warmer. Maybe that does give a slight boost. Urena, though, on the year, low barrel ball rate guy, 7.7%. Low launch angle guy, 9.3 degree launch angle for him. 14% K rate, so he's probably not a guy you're trying to play at pitcher here, along with the 282 batting average he's allowing. But Houston, I feel like they're going to get hits here. I don't know if they're going to get enough hits to make it useful, but it's a bad bullpen behind Urena. The park factors, I feel like, are the only concern for me, really, as well as the ownership. But how are you feeling about Houston? Because I guess they are a little bit under-owned, the top stacks tool, even though some of these guys, like Kyle Tucker, are going to be egregiously owned, it looks like. But going against Urena, I think definitely going to get hits. The question is if the power will be there.
Yeah, I mean, as it stands now, Houston is my favorite stack on the slate, and I have to think the ownership's going to come up as the day goes on, just because the matchup against Urena is so favorable, and everybody's been stacking Houston the last few days, and even though, like you said, there was that one game where it didn't work for the field, and it worked for me, that made it so I was happy I didn't really play all that much of Houston over the last 3 games. Like, is the field going to totally jump off of Houston in a really good spot against Jose Urena after they scored 13 runs yesterday? I tend to think not, but at least according to our data right now, Houston is the most positively leveraged stack on the entire slate because we have them with a 15.5% chance of being the top stack. And the ownership is only at 13%. So, with that in mind, Jose Urena, 5.79 ERA this year, 5.65 expected ERA. Jose Urena's had an ERA north of 5 and an expected ERA north of 5 now in 3 consecutive seasons. The guy just doesn't get big league hitters out. Also, pitches to contact a ton, doesn't generate swing and misses, doesn't generate strikeouts. So this is a really good spot for Houston, and there just isn't enough ownership going there. To your point, Kyle Tucker's over 20% owned. His price tag is also too cheap. But beyond that, Yordan Alvarez, 15%, Altuve only 11%, Gurriel 6%, Correa 9%. Your favorite player in the league, Abraham Toro, he's only 8% owned right now. So the ownership is just way too low given this matchup against Urena.
Yeah, and it is a bad bullpen behind him too. So if they do, Urena has a 10% walk rate. So if they start to really pile the hits up, things could get out of hand. So I'm with you. I think if they remain under-owned, it's a team that's probably worth getting to. I don't expect to see a ton of home runs like Urena for whatever flaws he has. Only 3.1% home run rate since 2019, 2.4% this year. So I don't expect to be a big bomb day, but a team like Houston does have some speed as well that it looks like the righty bat should be able to take advantage or when a guy's on base against a righty bat should be able to take advantage of. So that's going to be a boost for Kyle Tucker and for Miles Straw in particular. There are a lot of ways they can get here though today. So I think to me, I'm with you that if the ownership stays where it is, it would be hard to not get to Houston, even though Urena not giving up that power that much. Luis Garcia going on the other side and his this price tag can't be right. This has to be the other Luis Garcia. What's his price tag on DK?
I think it's 8,700.
Okay, so is there another Luis Garcia on the slate or in our projections? Because I pull the salaries from the Awesemo projections, and he's listed at 4K, which he would be a fantastic play if you were 4K. But that must be
there's probably like 30 Luis Garcias in the MLB.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's pulling the salary for another Luis Garcia. So keep that in mind if you are looking at the Awesemo data. But we have him listed at 4K. He's not 4K on DraftKings, but this guy has been really starting to come into his own of late recently. 28% K rate, 1.07 WHIP, 4 xFIP for himself. The pitch count not great overall in the year, just 82 pitches per appearance. But I think those numbers are trending upwards, and I'm sure Greg will give us a insight on that in a second here. But I like the numbers for him, and he's going against a Detroit team that strikes out at a 26.5% clip, and with that price tag at 4K, he would have looked really good. At 8,600, though, still a very solid play on a slate where the only stud you're really going to get is Walker Buehler. So in this spot, to me, Luis Garcia, I think a really solid play. Greg, are you on the same page with Team Garcia and the field as well? Going to be there about 31%.
Yeah, and if you look at the pitch count numbers, they're not actually concerned for me because if you look at it just aggregate for the season, he opened the year by throwing like 60, 70 pitches for start, and actually had one start where he only threw 26 pitches. His recent outings, though, 96 pitches, 84, 79, 106, and 100. So he's somebody who, as long as he's pitching well, he's going to be allowed to work basically the length of a normal starter at this point. And, Luis Garcia's pitched very well so far this season. Numbers overall for the year, 2.82 ERA, 3.41 expected ERA from a fantasy standpoint, 28.1% K rate. So, just 24 years old, somebody who generally expecting to be improving. Also, was a fairly well-regarded in the Astros organization just a couple of years ago. So I think everything's pretty good for Luis Garcia. It's a really strong matchup. The pitching options today aren't particularly good. So I don't have any issue with the 31% ownership. And the build I made this morning, I'm actually a little bit overweight to him.
And Detroit looks a little bit under-owned on the top stacks tool. They're not a team to me that I would have a ton of interest in getting to. I think, I guess Garcia's got enough of a high ownership mark that you could sort of make the case to get some of the bats here as leverage against them. But Greg, it seems like the field's not doing that a bunch. Ownership really only going to Candelario. Everybody else is going to be under 3% owned. And even Candelario is still under 5% owned. So I don't like the Tigers. I know they have had these days of busting up chalk pitching, but I don't have the faith that they're going to do that again. Are you feeling any differently here with a game where they only have a 3.9 implied total for themselves?
No, and here's the issue also with the Detroit Tigers is if I was going to roster a cheap stack like this and really value the top value aspect of our top stacks tool, it would be to pay up for pitching. But Garcia is one of the pitchers I want to pay up for the most. So it kind of would defeat the purpose for me because, Jose Barrios, Walker Buehler, both good plays. I like Walker Buehler a lot. Barrios, I like not quite as much as Luis Garcia. So with that in mind, if I'm going to stack the Tigers, it means that my pitching combination, that lineup is going to be 100% Walker Buehler and Jose Barrios because there's just no other pitching combination that really makes a whole lot of sense. Nick Pivetta 9,500. Like I said, I think he's a little bit overpriced. So yeah, I'm probably just going to have the Tigers either out of my player pool or just a very small amount of exposure to them if I end up being, super heavy on Luis Garcia for hedge purposes. But Tigers are one of my least favorite teams on the slate.
All right, next game up. And guys, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can also watch it or take it in podcast form by going to awesemo.com/podcast. Sometimes you don't want to pay that premium price on YouTube to get to listen to a show on the go, or if you're like our pal Eric Lindquist, sometimes you listen to a show on the go and just accidentally start banning people on chat because you have your phone in your pocket because you're keeping the screen open. So that's one thing you can avoid for yourself by going to awesemo.com/podcast. I guess I'm really just selling this ad to Eric Lindquist himself, but go get the audio form with shows like this one, all the ones with the shelf life, like the strategy shows, not the deeper dives, not the live before locks, but will be available for you guys over there. And if you leave a 5-star review along with your Twitter handle or your email address, you can win a free week of Awesemo Plus on there. So go check it out. They give those away every Friday. It's the best way to win a free week based on the numbers that come in over there. So go to awesemo.com/podcast and check out the options and give them some 5-star reviews and 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts. Next game up, we got Washington, 4.2 implied runs going against Cody Poteet on the air. Cody giving up a 190 batting average. He's only faced 113 batters, but the roof being closed here should help him out a little bit because he's given up a high barrel ball rate of 12%, 19-degree launch angle. So it seems like a spot here, Greg, where you are taking on a little bit of risk. If you go to Cody Poteet, field will be there about 10%. He basically looks flat on the top pitcher stool with where he's supposed to be. So Cody Poteet, to me, not a guy that stands out very meaningfully, and I feel like it's going to be a tough matchup for him against Washington. So if I had to choose, I probably would be a little more inclined for Washington bats, especially if that Poteet ownership comes out throughout the day.
Yeah, so the other thing too about Poteet is he's made 6 starts this year, but only thrown a total of 27 innings. So that's gonna be something that really caps his upside. He's generally not working all that deep into games. So Poteet, to me, especially because he's somebody who's already picking up ownership, not somebody I have interest in.
Nationals bats certainly going to be a little bit of a downgrade going to Miami with the roof closed, but still a team that can get going in any situation. You look at the numbers, guys like Juan Soto, he's kind of got a 440 on base percentage against right-hand pitching since 2019. Certainly been a monster in pretty much every possible way. Actually, also a 440 on base percentage overall over the last season and change. So Juan Soto, a very consistent player across the board. But the same thing with the Nationals as always, where I really never mind the top 4 or 5 hitters, and then you could sort of mix in one guy from the bottom of the order. And I think that exact approach is actually worked out once or twice this week. But how are you feeling about Washington in this spot? It feels like it's tough in the park, but given Poteet's numbers and the fact that it is a good team at Washington, I still feel like I can stack them up a little bit more.
Yeah, but once again, the salary is a little bit of an issue here. Trey Turner, 5,900, Juan Soto, 5,600. The only guy who's really reason to risk. And by the way, I don't know how Kyle Schwarber is more expensive at this point. So Schwarber is going to be pretty popular. But he has 6 homers in his last 4 games. He had a game against he torched the Mets. So 2 games against the Mets, he had 2 home runs and 3 homers. Then a game against the Phillies where Zach Wheeler started. He only had 1 hit in that game. But then last game he homered again against Vince Velasquez. So yeah, I don't really understand how Kyle Schwarber still has a sub 4K price tag. I don't think I want to get to the field having him around 20%, but certainly Kyle Schwarber is the guy that makes the most sense from the Nationals.
Schwarber with a 300 ISO since 2019 against right-hand pitching, and park factors really aren't going to be something you're going to worry too much about with him. 41% hard contact rate in that same time frame, and over the last season, a change of 14.2% barrel ball rate. So I'd agree he is one of those value plays up top or semi-value plays that'll be decently owned because he's in a leadoff spot and does have pop. But I'm a little more intrigued by the stack overall, and I think if you do get to the full stack and Schwarber's useful, a lot of people just have Schwarber as a one-off, and then you could hopefully get some of the increased production that could come if Schwarber does have success in his lead off at bats. Miami on the other side going against Joe Ross. Joe Ross kind of leveling out as a guy who's basically been the guy who's been over the last few years, maybe a slightly better version of himself, a 1.25 whip compared to 1.45 since 2019. 4.5 xFIP is also slightly improved. K rate still under league average of 22.5%, but Greg, he's facing a Miami team that strikes out at a 25% clip. And if Joe Ross were even anything approaching a reasonable price tag, I could see getting here, but he's just shy of 10K on the slate on DraftKings, and that's just an outrageous number for Joe Ross.
Yeah, I think on FanDuel, where he's priced at 7,400, that's a little more reasonable. I would actually consider Joe Ross on FanDuel just because of the matchup against the Marlins. But 9,600, I don't understand how this guy ends up here. And remember, way back in the day, like opening day, the first Joe Ross start, I was like, hey, Joe Ross could bounce back this year. And he hasn't really. He's just been, okay. Certainly not the pitcher that a lot of people thought he was going to be when he first broke into the league. But yeah, I mean, his numbers across the board are just very mediocre. He's not a high strikeout guy. So I have no clue how the DraftKings pricing algorithm landed on this kind of salary for him. So easy enough for me to not have him in my player pool, but at the same time, too, the Marlins very low odds of being a top stack while also picking up some ownership. So no interest in them either.
Yeah, I think Ross, you could talk me into taking, like, it's crazy because he's going to be 20% owned to this price tag, and it's not a good slate. As we talked about, really the studs are going to be, I guess, Jose Barrios, I didn't give enough credit to, but Walker Buehler, Jose Barrios, usually not the sign of a really strong pitching slate. But Joe Ross, like, I could see taking tournament flyers on him, especially if he were lower owned. But if he's going to be 19%, watch that number. I think if it comes down, you can get there and pay up to be contrarian with Joe Ross. But if the field's going to be there that heavy with 1/5 the lineups, I don't know that you need to get there any more than that. Miami bats, Greg mentioned, I feel like I'm on the same page here, so we could just kind of skip through them. But I don't think they're going to have a ton of success against Joe Ross. Also a decent bullpen behind him. So this spot's me, probably not one for Miami bats. Next game up, Cleveland, 3.8 implied runs going against Jose Barrios. Barrios on the year, 26% K rate is an improvement. 3.5 xFIP, also an improvement from his historical sample size. 1.1 whip, also on the upswing for him. But overall, Jose Barrios, not a guy that's going to be fantastic in a lot of spots. And I know he's had some success on the year, 95 pitch count for the most part on the year as well. But he's going against Cleveland as a 22.8% K rate. And it is a warm day here, 85-degree weather, 37% humidity in Minnesota. So I don't know, Barrios is fine. I feel like 20% ownership, though, like I'm not seeing a ton of utility. He looks under-owned in the top pitcher stool, so maybe a little more than I'm giving credit for. But I'm not dying to get to Barrios, Greg. I don't know if you feel differently, but it feels like a spot where he'll be useful or you're usable. But I don't know that he's going to have that GPP upside you'd like to see for a guy at his price tag.
So the issue is just the lack of pitching options on the slate. So he's still my third favorite pitcher on DraftKings. Number 1, Walker Buehler. Number 2, Luis Garcia. And then number 3, Jose Barrios, because we're still in a situation where we compare the other pitchers in the same price range here. And it's Barrios at 10,400, Nick Pivetta at 9,500, and then Joe Ross at 9,600. And the ownership is fairly flat across these guys. Joe Ross, 19% projected ownership, Barrios, 21%, Pivetta, 23%. So then we're just in a point where there's no ownership to consider. It's just really who is the best pitcher here, who has the best matchups. And to me, Barrios is the best fantasy pitcher of those guys. Like you said, the strikeout numbers this year, 25.7% K rate. That's a little bit higher than what it's been in the past. Also, 6.2% walk rate. So his walks way down. Last year was at 9.6%. So, with that in mind, I think relative to the other options here, Barrios is kind of in play by necessity.
Yeah, that's, I think, the best way to look at it, that you just sort of have to pay up somewhere. And Barrios, probably not going to kill you on this slate, but certainly a guy who's probably not going to give you a gigantic upside like you're normally paying up for when you get to this price tag. So definitely something to keep in mind. I don't hate the Cleveland bats going against them. I feel like they're not fantastic either, but you at least have guys who jump out into mini stack with Bobby Bradley, Jose Ramirez, Eddie Rosario, and at least Rosario and Bradley, reasonable-ish price tags. Ramirez still going to be priced about as expensive as anybody on the slate. But Cleveland, Greg, I feel like they're okay. They are under-owned in the top stack stool, so that's the main thing. Barrios, though, like I'm never a guy I'm really dying to target, so I feel like I'm just kind of making the case for Cleveland, and I don't feel it that strongly. So are you more interested in the Indians than I am?
I think they're worth having more exposure to than the field. The other thing also is all of the ownership going to this team is going to Jose Ramirez. He's expensive. He's also fairly popular, double-digit ownership. He's the only player on the team projected for more than 2% ownership right now, and that's with the double-digit ownership to Ramirez. So, I think this is going to be a very contrarian 5-man stack. So it's a team that I want to have a little bit more exposure to in the field, but by no means a primary option. But, guys like Eddie Rosario, Ahmed Rosario, they're both projected for 2% ownership. You mentioned Bobby Bradley. He's hit the ball well as of late. He's only projected for 1% ownership. Also some power upside in Bobby Bradley's homer, I think 3 times in the last week and a half. So, yeah, I think that it's worth getting these guys more than 1%.
Yeah, Bradley also a 20% barrel ball rate overall, so definitely some good marks for him over the last season and change, and certainly a guy that I don't mind taking at 1% ownership. The other side, we're going to have Giancarlo Mejia going against Minnesota. Minnesota stack looking very overowned. I think they actually might be the most over-leveraged team relative to DraftKings ownership right now. A lot of that going to Luis Arias up top, who we know, if you are playing MLB DFS frequently, a guy doesn't have a ton of power, who doesn't strike out, and gets on base pretty well, but normally not going to give you a ton of actual fantasy production in terms of the things we're looking at. I don't love this twin stack, and they're going to be owned a lot, it looks like. And, even though Araya is going to be the one who gets a lot of that ownership at a cheap price tag, Larnach going to be well owned. Nelson Cruz going to be decently owned. Kepler going to be decently owned. I feel like going against Mejia, who's got a 3-degree launch angle overall in the year, 6% barrel ball rate. I don't think Mejia is bad. Like, I don't know that he's a world beater of a pitcher for himself. Like, he's probably not a guy who's going to be great in fantasy unless he really ups that pitch count or that strikeout rate sometime soon. But I feel like he's okay enough, and it's a good bullpen behind him, only giving up a 3.7 xFIP on the year. That to me, the Twins just jump out as a team that I don't think is going to be as good as the field seems like they think it'll be. So how are you feeling about the Twins? And I guess if you have any interest in Mejia, feel free to throw it in.
No, I don't, especially because he very infrequently works, deep enough into games to have any fantasy relevance. The real key factor of this game to me is the Twins are one of the most popular stacks on the slate, and they don't have nearly the same odds of being a top stack compared to the other teams that are picking up similar ownership. So we have 11% ownership going to the Twins with a 6.8% chance to be a top stack. So they're by far the most negatively leveraged team on the slate. And then the teams that have similar ownership to them, the Toronto Blue Jays, 14% chance to be the top scoring team of the day. The Houston Astros, 15.5% chance to be the top scoring team of the day. So, these are teams that have like a 2.5x chance better of being a high scoring team. So at least as it stands now, the Twins are the team that would be most apt to be underweight to the field on. And this is going to be a team who, like the last 3 days, very likely be like the Houston Astros for me, where if the Twins have a bad game, I'm probably going to do well. If the Twins go out and score a whole bunch of runs, then it's probably going to suck for me.
Also, Rick Carlisle going to the Pacers, which I know is another sport, but that's one that was rumored, but an interesting move there for them.
Yeah, that's I was not expecting that, but hey, good for them. Yeah.
I mean, look, I think it's good. I'm intrigued by that move, and certainly something we'll talk about more in the NBA world. But one fun news item coming through Twitter right now: Pittsburgh next game up, getting 4 implied runs against Carlos Martinez. Carlos Martinez, another mediocre pitcher on a slate chock full of them, 16% carried, a 1.4 whip on the year, 5.1 xFIP. He's a guy that doesn't get great strikeouts. The price tag, though, is low enough. The field will own him about 19% of the time. And honestly, I feel like you could talk me into taking Pittsburgh stacks against him more than you could Carlos Martinez. And I certainly getting a little bit of exposure. He does have a 21.7% chance of being a top value pitcher or one of the top 2 value pitchers on DraftKings today. But Pittsburgh, I feel like, has enough guys here, like a Brian Hayes, who I mentioned every time we talk about Pittsburgh, Brian Reynolds, Colin Moran. Like, I think these guys have some potential against Martinez in a day where there's 86-degree weather, 70% humidity, and Martinez is just not that good. He does keep the ball down pretty well, so not a high exposure stack for me. But how are you feeling about Martinez? And I guess, are you buying more in on the ownership than I am? Because I hate the number that he has right now projected for him.
He's sucked this year. And, I don't know if you remember, but we had our friend Eric Smith, who used to just show up in the YouTube chat for the first month of the season to say, like, hey, we're underestimating the Cardinals. They're going to win the World Series, best team in baseball. As soon as, and by the way, he was talking about how good Carlos Martinez was going to be this year. As soon as that team started to fall apart, he stopped posting in the YouTube chat. He didn't show up anymore. He doesn't troll us anymore. But yeah, if he was here, he wouldn't even be able to defend Carlos Martinez. He's a 6.62 ERA this year, 5.91 expected ERA, and everything is just bad. I mean, he doesn't generate any swing and misses anymore. 15.6% strikeout rate for a guy who used to be one of the best strikeout pitchers, or at least one of the hardest throwing strikeout pitchers in baseball for a point in time. So Carlos Martinez has just been bad. I don't think he's capable of getting out big league hitters at this point. So, obviously there's always variance. Maybe he could pitch decently at any given time, and the Pirates would certainly be the matchup. But I'm way more apt to go to the Pirates side of the game. They are the team that we have as the second best chance being a value stack on the slate other than the Orioles. So yeah, I'm going to be getting to the Pirates here, especially because Carlos Martinez is projecting for 20% ownership.
Yeah, and it could be a spot too where just both sides end up not the most usable because Pittsburgh, it's not like they have a ton of power either, and Martinez does keep the ball down pretty well. Pittsburgh only a 123 ISO against right-hand pitching, but I'd rather take a shot on the bats because I think there is a chance for them to be a little bit better, even if you're not getting to the Kevin Newmans of the world that much potentially, but definitely some reason to go to Pittsburgh, I'd say today with that expected almost 20% ownership going to Carlos Martinez. The other side, we're gonna have Chad Kuhl going, and Chad Kuhl is one of those guys that always seems like he should be much worse than he actually is. A 5.8 xFIP, but still only giving up a 230 batting average on the year. Go back to 2019, same thing, a 5.3 xFIP, only giving up a 218 batting average. He doesn't get strikeouts, 17% strikeout rates, actually down from his 20% rates in 2019, but he doesn't miss bats either. He doesn't get guys to chase out of the zone. And I'd be willing to take a shot at St. Louis here in a humid day, a day where Kuhl is just not a guy that's that good. And it's, there's a lot more appealing hitting options. I would say we talked about Toronto, we talked about Houston, some of these other spots, but I feel like St. Louis, to me, Greg, more in play than Chad Kuhl, and Chad Kuhl will actually still be a little bit owned because the pitching is so bad that even Chad Kuhl will get ownership today.
Yeah, so the one issue I have here is that Chad Kuhl for his career has actually been competent against right-handed bats, and then he's gotten absolutely obliterated by lefties. And this is a pretty right-handed hitting lineup for the St. Louis Cardinals. So the only left-handed hitters we have to choose from here, Tommy Edman, who is a switch hitter, I think is a little overpriced at 5,100. And then there's Dylan Carlson, who I think is the best individual play on the team at 3,300, also hits near the top of the order. So I like Dylan Carlson a whole bunch. I think that he's somebody to work in as a value play, but some of these pay up options, it's hard for me to get to Nolan Arenado at 5,700, Paul Goldschmidt at 4,700. There's other first basemen I prefer. So the Cardinals aren't really a stack that I love on this slate. Just a couple of one-offs, and Dylan Carlson being the guy that I like the most.
Next game up and last game on the slate. So hit that like button if you haven't yet, whether you're watching live or after the fact. We appreciate it a bunch here. And just do that for any YouTube content creators like out there, because it does help out these channels more than you guys probably realize when watching them. But the last game here, we got the Cubs getting 3.1 implied runs going against Walker Buehler, who is the chalk pitcher of the slate. And I guess the lone bona fide stud, unless you are a big Jose Barrios fan. Though Buehler, one of those studs that to me, I'd like less in the field. Normally on this slate, I feel like you have to just kind of take him for what he is. A 25% K rate guy this year, has it a 28% K rate since 2019. So maybe this could be a spot that he does claw that number back up a little bit. But the 0.9 whip, 3.7 xFIP, those are the main things you're going to look at, in addition to it being a game at Dodger Stadium. So the power should be a little bit inhibited as well. Buehler, 40% ownership feels a little bit lofty, though it's really not that high, much higher above his top pitcher odds today, 38%. And that top pitcher tool is free today, so make sure to check it out throughout the course of the day as well. But Greg Buehler, a guy normally I'd go like, hey, go to another pitcher, go to this guy at this price tag. Instead, go to this guy. On this slate, I fully get the 40% ownership. He's going against a Cubs team that strikes out at a 26% clip against right-hand pitching. And I don't like Buehler that much. I feel like for 11,500 on DK, you should at least be at a 30% K rate for that kind of mark. But it's so bad, Greg, that I feel like you have to play Buehler and just kind of suck it up.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add here also, though, is he got off to a little bit of a slow start this season. He has been better in June than he was in earlier months. So in June, 3.31 FIP, 3.87 xFIP for Walker Buehler. So it does look like he's pitching a little bit better than he did at the start of the season. Also, at the start of the year, he was on a pretty restricted pitch count, not as much the case now. So by necessity, I'm going to be getting to a lot of Walker Buehler. He is my most rostered pitcher at the moment. I have him in about half my lineups. No issue with that. The matchup against the Cubs, they do a very top-heavy lineup, and then it's pretty soft towards the end of the order. But, more so than anything, it's just you look at the other pitchers on the slate. I like Luis Garcia, but I don't think he's as good as Walker Buehler. Jose Barrios, he's fine as probably like a second pitcher in most rotations, but he's priced like an ace today. So I prefer Buehler to him. And then the other guys, Anthony Kay is picking up ownership. Carlos Martinez is picking up ownership. Nick Pivetta is picking up ownership. So, just by that nature, Walker Buehler is somebody who I think is the top overall cash play on the slate. And then certainly for tournaments, I'm going to have a lot of them.
Yeah, and Buehler, to me, I think a higher priority than Barrios as well, even with the price tag increase. And I feel like Buehler and Garcia duo is probably going to be pretty popular today, and that's probably the combination that I would like the most. So maybe a spot to get different with your bats. The Cubs, spot for them where they are going to be a leveraged team potentially going against Buehler, though it's hard to expect him to get great results. But they're going to be entirely unknown, so I wouldn't hate taking a little bit of a flyer on them, Greg. Just, we have quality hitters here. Buehler, good, but maybe can give up some production, but not a high probability one or a high ownership one that I'd expect for the Cubs today, Greg. But I feel like getting a little bit of Cubs bats doesn't seem like the worst idea.
As every player in the lineup right now is projected for 1% ownership. So if you're playing 150 lineups and if you have, 50, 60% exposure to Walker Buehler, you want to make a couple Cubs stacks as a hedge, that's fine. But this is not a team I'm really looking to target. It has the lowest probability of anybody on the slate of being top stack. So Cubs, I don't think they're going to end up in my player pool. I just prefer the Buehler side. The other thing also is the Dodgers do have a good bullpen behind Buehler also.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Zach Davies on the other side, also not good. And also 8,100 for Zach Davies. I don't know, like that's the most hilarious price tag, but it is really right there with all the rest of them on the slate. But 14% K rate for Zach Davies on the year, 5.3 xFIP. He's been a little better historically, a 16.5% K rate and a 5 xFIP flat, but just not a guy who you should be playing very much of today going against the Dodgers, who are getting healthier. Mookie Betts, hopefully he'll be back today. But if he is back, this top six is now getting to like the championship levels that we'd expect from them with Betts, Muncy, Turner, Bellinger, Smith, and Taylor, all those guys over a 357 ISO, or 357 on base percentage. Not 357 ISO would be something else, but they are also high ISO guys. Zach Davies to me, Greg, I would have zero of, I think, or maybe some fractional amount that would occur in an optimizer. The Dodgers bats, though, I think have some appeal. It's not the hottest day, again, not great park factors, but they're so good and Davies is so bad that I wouldn't mind taking that shot.
Yeah, so as an individual hitter, it's hard to not like Cody Bellinger, only 4,300. Also, Zach Davies, like you said, has not been particularly good this year. 4.66 ERA, 6.34 expected ERA. He has been a guy for a lot of his career, has outperformed his peripheral stats. So absolutely impossible for me to get to any of Zach Davies at his price point. But then on the Dodgers side, this team is so expensive outside of Cody Bellinger. So Bellinger, definitely my favorite one-off hitter. But then Mookie Betts, 5,700. Max Muncy, 5,500. Will Smith, 4,800. Justin Turner, 5,900. Chris Taylor, 5,600. I don't think it's that viable to make five-man stacks unless we're just playing, like Carlos Martinez and Chad Kuhl at pitcher or something like that. So just given the price tags here, I don't really like the Dodgers.
Yeah, not a reasonable one. I guess you're probably going to get some Anthony Kay in your Dodger stacks if you do take five mans there. And worth pointing out too, behind Davies himself not that good, but the Cubs bullpen I would have graded as the best bullpen on the slate with a 1.2 whip, a 190 batting average allowed, 3.9 xFIP, 29% K rate, under league average home run rate too. So, if you are playing the Dodgers here, you're placing a bet really on them being good, but it's worth pointing out they're basically flat in terms of their chance to be a top stack along with their ownership today. But that rounds out all the games here. So all you could do right now for yourself is go play over at PrizePicks and use that promo code Awesemo for a $100 deposit match on that site. Use the promo code MLB Strategy Show to get yourself 25% off at awesemo.com/join as well. If you're mystified by all the data we talk about, all the ownership projections and the player projections, go check that out for yourself at awesemo.com/join with that promo code MLB live before lock. Follow at Chris Spags, follow at Ehrenberg. Actually, I don't know which way is Greg Tyler for me? If I point this way, okay. Right.
Nobody knows. It's a mystery. Listen. Some of the world's mysteries are unsolvable, right?
Follow
some
this
of the
guy.
Yeah, some of the world's greatest scientists and astrophysicists have been working on the problem. Nobody's going to find.
Okay, no. So wait, the pillow I have is over here, and you're over here. So follow at Ehrenberg DFS. I'm going to point this one there. Nailed it. All right. Follow at Awesemo_com and check out all the content. Greg, anything you want to say here before we close it out?
Nah, just follow that guy on Twitter.
Hey, follow at Ehrenberg. This guy right here. Follow him. But we'll be back later today. Again, the deeper dive and live before lock will be coming up at 5 p.m. Eastern. It'll be Eric and Alex doing the first part of that. Then it'll be me and Greg back again with more nuanced takes than we had right here. Appreciate you guys for being here. Enjoy the rest of your days. Good luck.